Hey guys, Sean Hammond with PremierGuitar.com. We're in Berlin, Germany at the Holy Grail Guitar Show with Paul Hamer with some very appropriately Rick Nielsen-ish chords at the beginning there.
Yep.
That's as you described them as Midwestern Rick Nielsen chords, I think. You have quite a history in the guitar business, of course. Paul Hamer, if you don't know, you guys, Hamer Guitars. You know, Rick Nielsen being a huge endorser of that, one of the original boutique guitar brands. You started that back in
1974. I finished my first guitar December 7th, 1974. And I made my first sale December 7th, 1974 too. Yeah, it's a little bit of a coincidence.
Nice. So, and how long after that was it you got hooked up with Rick?
Well, Rick
and Tom Peterson.
Yeah, those guys were friends of mine from very early days. Like the first time I ever saw them was, it must have been 1968 at the Electric Theater in Chicago. They were auditioning as a band called Grim Reaper for Epic Records, and they got signed that night. And their first record, they changed their name to Fuse. And so I knew them from those days, and Rick and I were, we were really early into vintage guitars. There weren't very many people at that time that thought of guitars as vintage, Mm-hmm. They thought of them as used. And so we did a lot of buying and selling and going back and forth, and really kind of helped each other out in the early days. And so we became friends.
Are you still based in Chicago, or?
Yeah, and Rick is still in Rockford.
There's a little smart car.
Smart car? Yeah. He is such a wonderful guy. He's generous and kind, and just absolutely a thrill to have known,
Cool. Well, we won't focus too much on that story. We want to touch on it a little bit, considering your history. What was the first guitar he bought from you? Do you remember?
It was the guitar I built for myself. So I built this guitar for myself, and one of the reasons that I built it was that in 1972 I'd been established as Gibson's first warranty repair shop out of the factory. And they were having a problem that year where somebody had installed all the bridges on Les Pauls 1/8 of an inch off. So they had kids all over the country that couldn't tune the instruments. So they asked me to help with that problem so that kids in Chicago area could bring their guitars into a store, get it fixed, and take it home. So that was my first introduction into guitar repair, and then working with the guys at Gibson. We used to go up there all the time and visit the factory, and then watching them work in their factory gave me the idea that, well, maybe I could do this myself. But I was one of those kids that would call them up and go, "Hey, I got this great idea. Why don't you make the Les Pauls with like curly maple tops? Because like you guys have plain maple now, but in the old days, these old guitars that I have in my store, they have curly maple on them." And they'd go, "No, we don't do that." And I'd say stuff like, "Well, the pickups on these old guitars, they really sound great. Can you make the new ones just like that?" And they go, "No, that's not what we do." So I just was getting nowhere with that, So I decided, well, I'd build a new guitar, but put old pickups in it. So my first guitar had patent applied fors in it, and Rick saw it. Right away, he ordered one.
Was this one of the standard Explorer-shaped one?
Yeah. Right away, when he picked up that guitar and put it on his body, it was him, It just fit him perfectly, and so he said, I'll take one. I want a natural one. And I said, "Oh, natural, okay. I'll try to do that." But it just took forever. And in the meantime, he said, "Hey, Paul, would you lend me your guitar?" And I said, "Oh, yeah, I can lend you the guitar." And then
Is this like the Cherry Burst one that's on the fold out on Budokan?
Yeah. And so it just...
He's wearing it with like a Strat, and he's wearing like three guitars.
Yeah. And that's the one. And he ended up buying that from me, too, because the natural one took so long. But that's how it's all started.
Does he still have it, or did you ever get it back?
Oh, yeah, no, it was a museum in Rockford did a great show on him a few years ago, and that guitar was #1 ensconced in a plexiglass case, and it just was really, really well done museum show. It's really great.
Very cool. All right, well, let's talk about this. This is visually a far cry from that, but it sounded so mean and badass, a lot more rockin' than kind of you might expect looking at the design of this.
That's kind of the concept, is that a few years ago my kids came to me and they said, "Dad, you should be making guitars." And I said, "Well, the only reason to build a guitar is if you have something new to say." And so they said, "Well, let's say something new." So my oldest son is an architect. My daughter is a graphic designer. My youngest son has turned out to be a great woodworker. And my wife's involved, and all of their wives and girlfriends. And so kind of this came about all sorts of different ways, lots of different influences. For instance, my youngest son and I are really into Stradivarius, and so we've been studying about him, looking at his instruments, and so you can see some Stradivarius influences here. I'm really into Django Reinhardt, so you can see some Machiavelli influences here in the Cutaway. The back of the guitar is has some interesting features too.
That reminds me of an old German guitar. I can't think of it. It starts with an H, I think, or something.
Oh, yeah.
I wish I could remember. Is this inspired by?
This is inspired by kind of 14th century lutes, but it has a different purpose here. So with these ridges, the top of these ridges are the only thing that touch your body. And so there's not as much friction on your body as on, say, a Les Paul or something, because only the ridges are touching you. And what we say is when you're shredding, these are cooling fins.
Now, is the body solid or semi?
One of the neat things about this is we're using only old growth materials, so we don't think, why should we spend so much time building something if it's not going to be the finest quality material that we can find. So this is all old growth curly maple. This is a one-piece body, which is really hard to find this wide one piece. And the top on this guitar is really interesting. It's a
spruce, right?
Sitka spruce. It came from a tree that was 400 years old, and each one of these lines on the top of the guitar represents a year of growth. And so on this guitar, there's 265 years of growth. So
this is a solid piece, not book matched.
Yeah, it's one solid piece of spruce. Usually, right, like you say, they're book matched, but this is solid. And so those are some kind of the interesting little things about the instrument that aren't apparent when you take a look at it,
So it is solid though, and there's no chambering.
Yeah, well, there's just a hole right there for the rose. So
that's the most eye-catching part. Like, tell us about that.
So the rose is made out of leather, and it's put together kind of like a birthday cake. So these little pieces of leather are glued together, and then we glue them into this ring here. Underneath it's glued, so this whole thing comes out as one piece.
That's crazy intricate.
Yeah, it's crazy. So
how is that made?
So we can do all sorts of different designs. Like if you look at the other one we have on display, it has a checkerboard inside design inspired by Rick. So it's. I think it's just remarkable. It's one of those things where from a distance it calls you to the guitar,
How do you construct that? How do you make that intricate pattern out of leather?
Yeah, so it's all punched. It's you work it just like leather, Do
you do that, or?
I don't. No, this is done by a woman who has
a leather artist.
Yeah, she's a leather artist. She is. She does incredible work.
Do you feel like this affects the sound of the guitar very much, having that density gone, or?
No, not at all. Not at all. I mean, one of the things about the design of this guitar, we had a kid come in the store recently, and he looked at the instrument and he said, "Wow, look how deep that is." And then he said, "Wait a minute, you look at it from the side, and that depth is not there." He goes, "I get it. It's an optical illusion." And I thought about it. Well, yeah, it's an optical illusion. Some people have come by the booth today and they go, "Oh, look at the back. It's like a boat." Now, I never thought about that, but I guess it does kind of look like a boat, you know?
Now, I used to have this poster, a tear-out poster from a magazine, like literally 30 years ago, of like vintage guitars. Some German design, but like a thick hollow body. Now it's going to drive me crazy because it had a back like that.
Oh, really?
I'll have to figure that out. But anyway, back to the guitar. There are a couple more really notable things that are head turning. No pun intended. The headstock is turned at a remarkable angle. Is that more to be visual, or is that to affect the string tension, or?
Well, this is the other thing about making something new. You know, we wanted to make a statement, and pretty much everything had been done already. And so we thought, let's do some experimenting with the lute peg head or the oud peg head. And so we've done many of these just building necks and to find the angle that works the best for a guitar player. So if you look at the oud or you look at the lute, their angle is very steep, and so you can't get into first position very well. And so we thought, we want to keep this steep, but at what point does it work for a guitar player? And so this is the angle that we came up with.
Do you feel like that changes the feel of the string tension much?
It does. It's a lot like when people like when Hendrix played a right-handed guitar left-handed, it made the low E string longer, and so it gave different tension on the fingerboard. So it's a little bit like that. It's it changes things, but to what degree that's something that the player has to decide.
So, two other questions. The fretboard material is unique, and then maybe tell us about the pickup.
So Seymour Duncan made this pickup for us. It's from his Antiquity series, and we wanted to do something different from the old days. When I thought, putting a cover back on a pickup is a great idea, because most people think of Les Pauls with the covers off. And so I thought, put the cover back on and get a different type of appearance.
So this is kind of, in terms of pickups, you've kind of stuck with that same PAF
I
tonality.
PAF sound, but we can use anything. This is something that we can very much like in the old days. People can come into our workshop and decide what they want. And we're willing to experiment if you are.
Cool. Now, the fretboard is made of, you said, Ivoroid?
Yeah. So Ivoroid, this material comes from England, and many years ago they banned ivory for manufacturing. And so the pool cue industry needed a material that looked like ivory to work in pool cues, and they came up with this Ivoroid. And so
the same Ivoroid that's used in a lot of binding on acoustic bodies or necks.
I don't think anybody uses that. Anybody uses this material for that. That's a different type of
like
material.
People are using the Ivoroid name generically, but it's not the Ivoroid.
Yeah, so this is a much harder material. Like it would be really difficult to use this as a binding, I think. But it works great for fingerboards because it's very dense. So like in a pool cue, it's got to take a lot of shock, And so this polish is really nice. And so this is an Ivoroid fingerboard on top of a maple fingerboard underneath. It's kind of hard to see. You might be able to go in on the side there and you'll see it's double layered. So there's the Ivoroid layer and then the fingerboard layer. I was out at Rick Nielsen's house last year, and he said, "Paul, I got to practice. I got something coming up." And I said, "Oh yeah, what are you practicing?" He goes, "Well, I'm playing the Star Spangled Banner at a ballpark." And I thought, "Oh, that's difficult, I mean, really, how do you follow Hendrix's Star Spangled Banner?" And so he played it for me. And I'm going to mangle it for you right now, but his arrangement is so original and so unique that I thought, I'll give it a try,
Cool.
So
Let's hear it. No, not at all. thanks for telling us all this stuff. We could talk for a long time about all that you've been through, but do you want to tell people where to go online to find out about the stuff you're doing today and then maybe play us out?
Sure. We're at h-guitars.com, and you can find us on Facebook. And we'd love to have you come and experience what we're all about.
Cool. Thanks, Paul.